So, Princess Anne has essentially blocked Camilla from accessing part of Sandringham, and what makes this situation really compelling is how it went down. Because this isn't the usual royal drama with screaming matches or leaked messages. This is proper lawyers and formal legal documentation. Princess Anne had her legal team officially record usage rights for a particular wing of the Sandringham estate, which effectively prevents Queen Camilla from using that space for the summer retreat she was apparently intending to have. And that's what makes this so unusual. The royal family rarely resorts to lawyers for internal family property matters. They normally rely on informal agreements, long-standing traditions, and quiet understandings passed down through generations. The fact that Princess Anne felt she needed to put this in writing speaks volumes about how much those informal understandings have eroded. Before I dive deeper into why this matters and what it really says about the relationship between these two women, I just want to say, if you enjoy these detailed looks into royal family dynamics, make sure to hit subscribe and join us here at Crown Watch. We unpack the real stories behind the headlines music every single week. Alright, let's get into it. So here's what's actually going on. Sandringham isn't like Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle. Those properties are part of the Crown Estate, which means they belong to the nation under a complex historical trust arrangement. Sandringham is different. Queen Victoria purchased it in 1862 as a private gift for her son, the future King Edward VII, and it has been handed down from monarch to monarch ever since as personal property. It doesn't belong to the state. It belongs to the king personally. We're talking more than 20,000 acres of farmland in Norfolk, complete with several residences across the grounds. There's the main Sandringham house, Wood Farm Cottage where Prince Philip spent his retirement years, and Anmer Hall, which serves as Prince William and Catherine's country home. This estate has always functioned as the monarchy's private sanctuary. It's where the family comes together for Christmas. It's where Queen Elizabeth spent her final years. It's the place they go to escape public scrutiny. And because it's privately owned by whoever is on the throne, access to the various residences has traditionally been managed through family agreements rather than legal contracts. It's always been based on trust and custom. And that system works until trust starts to break down. The tension between Princess Anne music and Queen Camilla is not a recent development. It dates back decades to the complicated personal history around King Charles and Camilla's early relationship in the 1970s. When Charles married Diana, it created deep fractures within the family, and the very public breakdown of that marriage left wounds that never completely healed. Camilla endured years of harsh public criticism before she was slowly accepted as Charles's partner, and eventually became queen consort. During that same period, Princess Anne was steadily building her image as the most disciplined and duty-focused member of the family. She has consistently been the hardest-working royal, carrying out hundreds of engagements annually while keeping her personal life relatively private. Her approach to royal duty is famously no nonsense. The institution always comes first. And that core difference in outlook has often placed Anne and Camilla on opposing sides of internal family discussions. Anne is practical and uncompromising. Camilla's perspective tends to be shaped by personal relationships and social circles that predated her official entry into the royal family. According to sources close to the palace, the relationship between the two women is polite but distant, more mutual tolerance than real warmth. For the most part, this tension has remained beneath the surface, but recent developments appear to have brought music out into the open. The issue that seems to have triggered the current situation is the ongoing situation with Prince Andrew. Andrew's fall from public life remains one of the most dramatic chapters in recent royal history. Following the revelations about his connection to Jeffrey Epstein, Andrew was stripped of his remaining royal titles, music, and removed from all official duties. He eventually had to vacate Royal Lodge at Windsor and relocated to Wood Farm, that much more modest property music on the Sandringham estate. The situation became even more difficult when fresh legal issues brought Andrew under further music scrutiny and actually drew police interest to the Sandringham grounds. The optics were damaging for the entire family. According to royal sources, Princess Anne music was seriously concerned about Andrew's well-being throughout this time. And look, I understand that Andrew is extremely unpopular and with good reason, but from Anne's point of view, he is still her brother. She reportedly pushed for him to be treated with basic dignity music, even while the institution worked to distance itself from the scandal. Queen Camilla, by contrast, took a much firmer stance. Her position, according to sources, music was that any visible support for Andrew risked reopening wounds. The monarchy music had spent years trying to heal. She felt that protecting the institution required maintaining the greatest possible distance from Andrew and his controversies. So it's easy to see how this created a serious conflict. Anne was pushing for family loyalty and basic compassion. Camilla was focused on institutional protection music and public image. Both positions make sense in their own right, but they are fundamentally incompatible, and this disagreement over Andrew appears to have intensified the existing tensions music between Anne and Camilla significantly. When you're already divided on such a core issue as how to handle a disgraced family member, it's no surprise that other disagreements start to carry more weight. That's the background for what happened next. Princess Anne's legal team formally documented and secured usage music rights to a specific wing of the Sandringham estate that has traditionally been associated with her side of the family. Now this is key to understand. Anne is not claiming ownership of the land. Sandringham still belongs to King Charles as his private property. What Anne has done is music turn previously informal family arrangements into formal legal protections. This kind of step is actually quite common in large family estates across Britain when multiple generations share the same properties. Lawyers draft documented occupancy rights or licensing agreements to avoid future conflicts. It's standard practice in aristocratic families. What makes it stand out here is that the royal family has almost always depended entirely on informal understandings for these matters. For decades, no one felt the need to involve lawyers over who stays where at Sandringham. The fact that Anne felt formal documentation was necessary indicates she no longer trusted the old informal system to safeguard her household's access. The timing feels especially deliberate. There had been quiet talk about Queen Camilla spending more time at Sandringham as a summer retreat. Camilla has always appreciated the estate's grounds and scenery, especially since King Charles usually spends long stretches of the summer at Balmoral in Scotland. Sandringham looked like an attractive option for Camilla to enjoy a lower-profile stay while still staying within the royal sphere. But by formalizing her household's rights at this moment, Anne has made sure that the wing connected to her family cannot simply be reassigned. The practical outcome is clear. A door that might have been opened through private family discussion has now been firmly closed through legal paperwork. And this is where things become particularly fascinating. If you consider what Camilla is actually losing here, Camilla has had her own personal sanctuary for decades, long before she became music queen. Raymill House in Wiltshire. That was her private refuge, the place where she could escape the demands of royal life and hold on to some independence. Even after marrying Charles, Raymill stayed closely tied to her sense of privacy and personal music space. But in recent times, there have been reports that Camilla has been changing her living arrangements and becoming more integrated into the royal estate system, gradually giving up some of that outside independence. So the prospect of a summer retreat at Sandringham wasn't simply about convenience. It represented finding a new private space inside the royal world, a replacement for the independence she has been slowly surrendering. And now that possibility has been shut down, not through a conversation that could potentially be worked out, but through formal legal documentation that's far more difficult to reverse. Whether Camilla had concrete plans for that particular wing, or whether Anne's action was precautionary, the result is identical. A potential retreat has been taken off the table, and it was done through a formal process that sends a strong message about boundaries. The position this creates for King Charles is genuinely challenging. Sandringham is his personal property, yet this dispute involves two of the most significant people in his life, his sister and his wife. Both are known for their strong personalities and strong convictions, and Charles depends on both of them in different capacities. Anne has always been one of the monarchy's most steadfast and reliable figures. She maintains a demanding schedule of engagements and quietly supports the institution behind the scenes in ways that rarely receive public recognition. She has been a steady, reliable presence through decades of family crises. Camilla, on the other hand, has become an indispensable partner in Charles's music public role as monarch. She spent years overcoming widespread public hostility and has positioned herself as a calming, supportive figure by the king's side. Charles needs both of these women, and the broader family situation makes choosing sides even more complicated. The fallout from the Prince Andrew situation continues to linger. Prince Harry remains distant from the working royal family. Charles is dealing with his own health issues. The institution itself is under considerable pressure, and the last thing anyone wants is an open conflict between the Queen and the Princess Royal. So, for now, sources indicate that Charles has opted for the classic royal approach: silence. Don't address it publicly. Don't push for an immediate resolution. Just let it simmer. But silence doesn't actually solve underlying tension. In most cases, it simply delays the moment when a decision music becomes unavoidable. Eventually, Charles will have to address this because, having lawyers involved in family property disputes, music is not something that tends to fade away by itself. The introduction of legal documentation music into the management of Sandringham is genuinely meaningful for anyone who follows royal history. For generations, the family's approach to access for different residences relied entirely on informal agreements and discreet understandings about who would stay where during visits. These arrangements reflected a culture rooted in tradition and personal trust. The expectation was always that family members would sort things out among themselves without bringing in outside professionals. When lawyers begin producing formal documents, it signals that those informal systems are no longer functioning effectively. By having her legal team document usage rights, Princess Anne has transformed what was once a private family conversation into an official legal matter. The ultimate ownership of Sandringham hasn't changed. The estate still belongs to Charles, but written agreements now establish expectations that are far more difficult to modify on short notice. What once depended on goodwill and mutual understanding now carries the weight of legal clarity. And that shift matters because it suggests the internal relationships within the House of Windsor are changing. Moving away from a structure based purely on tradition toward one increasingly shaped by formal agreements and legal protections. When legal language replaces family understanding, it usually indicates deeper issues beneath the surface. You don't involve lawyers unless you believe you need them. Sandringham has always held a special place in royal life. It's where monarchs could temporarily step away from ceremony and simply be a family. Christmas traditions are kept alive there. Long walks through the Norfolk countryside offer a break from public duties. Some of the most private moments in royal history have taken place on that estate. But even this deeply personal space is not immune to the tensions running through the modern monarchy. Princess Anne's legal actions have turned part of the estate into a symbol of division, a boundary line drawn within the family itself. For Queen Camilla, it represents an unexpected barrier and likely feels like a personal slight, whether that was the intention or not. For King Charles, it underscores the nearly impossible challenge of balancing family loyalty with the responsibilities of leadership, and for those observing the monarchy, it raises a question that's difficult to dismiss. If the royal family needs lawyers to decide who can use which part of their private estate, what does that reveal about the true state of relationships inside that family? The most telling royal conflicts don't usually play out in public. They happen quietly behind closed doors, through the kind of legal paperwork that never generates headlines, but fundamentally alters the reality of how people coexist, or in this case, how they no longer do. Now, I want to explore a bit further into princess Anne's specific motivation here, because I believe there's more at play than just the Andrew situation. If you examine Anne's entire life trajectory, her relationship with physical spaces inside the royal estates has always been somewhat layered. She doesn't possess the same kind of extensive collection of residences that some other family members have acquired over time. Gatcombe Park in Gloucestershire has been her main country home since 1976, a gift from the Queen that granted her real independence. But Anne has also maintained a consistent presence at the various royal estates throughout her life, especially at Sandringham. Her children, Peter Phillips and Zara Tyndall, grew up spending considerable time there. There are decades of family memories connected to those rooms and corridors. So when I see Anne moving to legally protect her household's access to a specific wing, I don't just see a response to the current tensions with Camilla. I see someone thinking several steps ahead. Someone looking toward how the estate will be managed in the coming years and decades, and someone determined to ensure that her branch of the family keeps its established place within that landscape. It's the kind of proactive, protective approach that has always defined Anne's way of operating. She doesn't wait for problems to emerge and then react. She anticipates, prepares, and acts decisively. That's who she has always been. And this leads me to something that doesn't receive enough attention when we discuss royal family dynamics. The generational shift taking place right now is massive. Queen Elizabeth served as the central force holding this family together for more than 70 years. Her presence, her authority, and her way of doing things kept the family in a particular orbit. When she passed, that gravitational pull changed. Charles is now the monarch, but he does not carry the same kind of unquestioned familial authority that his mother possessed. He simply doesn't. And that means the old methods of resolving disputes, the informal conversations, the quiet deference to the sovereign's wishes, those mechanisms are weaker now than they have ever been. In that kind of environment, it makes perfect sense that someone like Princess Anne would turn to legal structures to secure her position. She isn't being dramatic or overly suspicious. She's being pragmatic about the reality that the old system relied on a central figure who is no longer present, and the new system has not yet fully taken shape. The legal paperwork essentially serves as a bridge between the informal past and whatever the future of the monarchy will look like, and she is making sure her family doesn't slip through the cracks during that transition. There's another important layer to consider here as well: music, and it relates to the larger question of how the royal family handles its private wealth and property music in an age of heightened public scrutiny. Every royal expense, music, every use of a residence, and every allocation of resources now faces intense media and public examination. The era when the family could quietly rearrange properties among themselves music without anyone noticing has ended. In that environment, having clear legal documentation may actually safeguard everyone involved, including Charles and Camilla, should any future controversy arise about who is using which part of Sandringham and on what grounds. Formal agreements provide a clear, defensible answer. They remove the ambiguity from the situation. I'm not suggesting that Anne's main motivation was to spare Charles future PR problems. I believe her primary goal was music protecting her own household's interests. However, a secondary benefit of formalizing these arrangements is that it introduces transparency and clarity into a system that has long operated on opacity and unwritten assumptions. That's not necessarily a negative development for an institution that is constantly working to show it is modern, accountable, and professionally managed. Let me also address something I've seen appearing in the comments on some of our previous videos. Some viewers have suggested that this situation is being overstated, that Camilla probably wasn't even interested in that particular wing, that Anne's legal move was just standard estate management, and the media is inflating it into a feud because that's what the media does. And I completely understand that skepticism. I really do. We've all watched how royal stories can get blown out of proportion and music twisted. But here's why I believe this particular case is genuinely meaningful. In the world of the British aristocracy, and the royal family sits right at the top of that world, property arrangements are never only about property. They're about status. They're about influence. They're about who truly belongs and who doesn't. When you formalize a right of usage, you're not simply securing a physical space. You're making a deliberate statement about your position in the family hierarchy. You're declaring that your connection to that place does not depend on anyone's goodwill or favor. It is established. It is documented. It is protected. That's a powerful message to send. And it's not one that gets sent lightly. Anne doesn't do things lightly. Everything she does is calculated. So yes, on the surface this may appear to be a routine legal step, but when you consider the known tensions between these two women, the deliberate timing, and the long-standing tradition of how Sandringham has been managed, I think it's entirely reasonable to see this as a significant moment in the ongoing evolution of the family's internal dynamics. And music. What about Camilla's perspective in all of this? I've spent considerable time discussing Anne's motivations and the wider historical context, but I think it's important to sit with what this must feel like from Camilla's point of view. This is a woman who spent decades being cast as the villain in a very public national love story. She endured a level of public hatred that most people can barely comprehend. She was vilified in the press, blamed for the collapse of Charles and Diana's marriage, and treated as an outsider who would never truly belong. She had to climb a steep mountain of disapproval to reach the position she holds today. And even after marrying Charles, even after becoming queen, there have always been quiet whispers that she isn't fully accepted by certain parts of the family, that some still view her as the newcomer, the interloper, the one who doesn't completely grasp the heavy responsibilities of the institution she now represents. Now, imagine being in that position and music finding out that your sister-in-law has brought in lawyers to ensure you cannot use a particular section of the family estate. It doesn't matter how politely it's framed or how legally justified it may be, on a personal, human level, that hurts. It taps into every insecurity about whether you are truly welcome. It sends a clear signal that you are still, after all this time, someone whose presence needs to be carefully managed and limited. I'm not claiming Anne intended to cause that kind of emotional pain. I genuinely don't know what her exact intentions were, but I do know music that impact matters just as much as intent, and the impact on Camilla in this case is unlikely to be anything positive. This situation also raises important questions about the future of Sandringham itself. Charles is not a young man music, and he is managing significant health issues that have been openly acknowledged. When William eventually ascends to the throne, music he will also inherit Sandringham as private property. William and Catherine already have a deep connection to the estate through Hall, which they renovated and have used as a family base for years. Their children have spent important formative years there, riding ponies, exploring the grounds, and creating their own memories, just as music earlier generations did. When William becomes the owner of Sandringham, how will he manage these kinds of internal family disputes? Will he keep the formal legal arrangements that Anne has established in place? Or will he attempt to return to a more traditional, informal way of handling things? Will he bring his own vision for how the different residences on the estate should be allocated? These are not hypothetical questions. The way property is handled inside the family has a direct effect on relationships, music, and those relationships have a direct effect on how well the monarchy functions as an institution. A family that is arguing over rooms, wings, and access rights is a family that is distracted from the public duties it is expected to fulfill. There's also the question of whether Anne's legal move could set a precedent that other family members decide to follow. If Anne can formalize her usage rights, why couldn't other members of the family do music the same? Prince Edward and Sophie, for example, have their own established connection at Bagshot Park. Princess Beatrice and Princess Eugenie have their own ties to various royal properties. If the culture shifts from informal understandings to legal documentation, we could witness a wave of similar actions as different family members work to lock down their positions. That would fundamentally alter how the royal family operates on the inside. It would bring in a level of formal legal structure that has never been part of their internal dealings before. Whether that's a positive or negative development depends entirely on your perspective. Some would argue that clear legal frameworks music help prevent misunderstandings and reduce long-term conflict. Others would argue that bringing lawyers into family relationships damages those relationships by replacing trust with music, contractual obligations. Both arguments have validity, and I suspect the truth sits somewhere music in between. I'd also like to touch on the role that the late Queen Elizabeth continues to play in this music story, even though she is no longer with us, because, in many ways, this entire situation is a direct result of her absence. While she was alive, Elizabeth served as the ultimate mediator of family disputes. Her word carried final weight, not because she held any legal power over her adult children's lives, but because her moral authority inside the family was absolute. Nobody music wanted to be the one who caused problems for the Queen. Nobody wanted to add to her burdens music, and that created a strong incentive for family members to settle their differences privately. Music can at least maintain the appearance of unity. With Elizabeth gone, that powerful incentive has vanished. There is no longer one central figure whose disapproval carries enough influence to keep everyone aligned. Charles is the king, but he is also a brother, a husband, and a father. His relationships with the other family members are more complex, music, and less commanding than his mother's were. Anne doesn't look at Charles the same way she looked at Elizabeth. Camilla certainly doesn't, and so, the old ways of resolving conflict have weakened. Music and new approaches, including legal ones, are stepping in to fill the gap. It's a natural evolution, but it also represents a loss. Something intangible, music, yet very real, has faded from the heart of this family. Looking forward, I think the most probable outcome is a sustained period of quiet tension. Charles will likely continue to avoid music taking sides, and will go about his duties as usual. Anne will continue her work with her typical brisk efficiency, confident that her legal position is now protected. Camilla will look for other ways to create private space for herself, perhaps at a different property, or in another section of Sandringham entirely. The family will still gather for Christmas, pose for photographs, and smile for the cameras, and none of this will be visible on the surface. But underneath, the dynamic will have shifted. The relationships will carry the additional weight of what has occurred. The trust that was already fragile will have grown a little thinner, and the institution will carry on as it always has, because that's what the monarchy does. It survives. It adapts. It absorbs tensions and keeps moving forward. But survival and adaptation always come at a cost, music, and the cost here is being paid in the currency of family relationships. The real question is, how much of that currency remains, and whether there will eventually come a point when the balance runs out. For now, the lawyers have completed their task. The documents have been filed, and a wing of Sandringham has become a clear boundary line between two women who were never going to be close friends. The story continues, and we'll be here to follow it wherever it leads.